Ma, Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, joining you today from the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We are approaching the end tail of this wildfire season, and I am pleased to share that an increasing number of people are returning to their communities. As of this morning, there are approximately 1,200 people on evacuation order, which is less than 1/3 as many people as when I provided my update last week, and over 34,000 people on evacuation alert. But the fires we experienced this year are having a lasting, significant impact on people and communities. Many of the structures lost were people's homes. And the loss of a structure is one thing, but when it's your home, what's lost is a lot more than wood, concrete, and steel. This is a loss of cherished memories, irreplaceable belongings, and the place where family bonds and relationships were formed. For some, the only photographs and images they had of friends and loved ones lost from this world have also now been lost in those fires. I cannot imagine the emotional toll that many people are experiencing at this time. Recovering from a loss like this is complex and overwhelming. It can be difficult to know where to turn. So to support and guide people who have lost structures, businesses, and homes, or even those who need a bit more support personally as they grapple through what their communities have just been through, the province has been working with local authorities to open community resiliency centers. Community resiliency centers are one-stop shops to assist people and businesses as they begin the transition from response to recovery. They bring together different resources into one place to provide supports and information from a variety of government and non-government agencies. These include ministry services, Service BC, Work BC, Service Canada, provincial and municipal building permit advisory support, insurance supports, community caseworkers, and others, depending on the needs of those communities. There are currently community resiliency centers in West Kelowna to support rebuild efforts within the regional district of Central Okanagan, and in Salmon Arm to support rebuild efforts within the Columbia-Shuswap regional district. The impact of the 2023 wildfire season has been devastating for many communities, and different communities will move into recovery at different paces. We will continue to work with communities in developing recovery plans and ensure that they have the supports they need as they go forward. I also want to acknowledge that while structural losses can be devastating for people and communities, a community does not necessarily need to experience structural losses to be left reeling from the wildfire season. Many communities and small businesses have been challenged by a dramatic impact on tourism as well. Communities that have been impacted want people to know that their doors are open and safe for visitors. People want to know how they can help. They can do so by visiting these communities and supporting small businesses. For trip inspiration, ideas, and planning, residents and visitors can visit hellobc.com. We want you to enjoy beautiful British Columbia and to do so safely. So please know before you go. Study the BC Wildfire Service map for wildfires in the areas that you're headed to. Check Drive BC for impacts on highways, and have an emergency bag with you in your car. At home and at work, please continue to be prepared. Have an emergency grab-and-go kit ready, pay close attention to orders and alerts issued by your local government or First Nation, and when an evacuation order is issued, you must leave the area immediately. Support is available if you need to evacuate. As I mentioned, we are nearing the end of the fire season, but we are not yet in the clear. There are still hundreds of wildfires burning throughout BC, and it continues to be a challenging season in the north. Above seasonal temperatures affected much of the province, and in the northern areas, they have the potential for strong, gusty wind conditions this week, especially in the Prince George Fire Centre. The severity and complexity of this year's wildfire season has taught us a lot, as have several other climate emergencies that we've experienced together over the last several years. Being prepared for a future emergency is an endless job, and there is always room for improvement, even as we continue to respond to the emergencies before us right now. Earlier this week, Premier Eby announced the launch of an expert task force on emergencies. This task force will help us determine how we can better support people on the front lines and ensure that we are rapidly deploying resources and solutions as they are needed. It will focus on offering guidance on boosting local volunteer recruitment, fostering deeper collaboration with communities and First Nations, integrating municipal firefighting and other emergency services, and deploying enhanced technologies. The task force is also committed to addressing how we can enhance assistance for evacuees, with a focus on ensuring timely access to emergency supports and accommodation resources. Countries around the world are grappling with the consequences of climate change, and we can learn from our own experiences as well as those of other jurisdictions to see what works and what doesn't. Because the climate crisis isn't just knocking on our door, it has stormed into our house, and as we have seen, the consequences are severe. Mother Nature is changing fast, and we all need to work together if we want to have a hope of keeping up. I'll now turn it over to Minister Ralston.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much, Minister Ma. Good afternoon. I'm Bruce Ralston, the Minister of Forests. I, too, am honored to be here on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Let me just begin with the active wildfire numbers. There are currently 393 active wildfires burning across the province, with 12 wildfires of note. So last time we did this, it was over 400, so it's trending in the right direction. But comparing those numbers to 1 year ago today, there's a dramatic difference. At this time last year, there were only 188 active wildfires and 5 wildfires of note. So you can see, again, the dimensions of the fire season this year being that much greater. It has been a long, challenging fire season, the worst in British Columbia's history, and it is not over yet. Over and over, people across British Columbia have pulled together to support one another. Firefighters, emergency personnel, and first responders continue to show up day after day to support and defend our communities. Thank you to everyone who is fighting fires and supporting communities in British Columbia. And thank you to everyone in British Columbia who continue to pull together to get through this fire season. We continue to have strong resources in place with almost 600 out-of-province personnel from across Canada, as well as Mexico, South Africa, and Australia. Earlier this week, they were also joined by additional resources who arrived from the United States and Ontario. We are incredibly grateful for this continued support and for the ongoing dedication of all those involved. Despite the challenges and devastation of the wildfire season, it is always incredible to see spirit and dedication that people bring to their work. Last weekend, folks from South Africa who have been fighting fire for weeks gifted local crews with a performance of dancing and singing, along with a presentation of their national flag, a work shirt, and a badge. It's experiences like this that bring people together and help boost morale at a time when many of our crews are very tired from a long season and need it most. Most of British Columbia will continue to be dry this week, with warm and dry trends continuing into the coming week. This week, we anticipate, as Minister Ma has said, windy conditions in some parts of the province, which the BC Wildfire Service will elaborate on shortly. For many parts of the province, this is the driest time of year historically, which means higher risk for wildfires, but also a continuation of the drought conditions we've seen all summer. So let me turn to drought. Right now, nearly 80% of the province remains at drought level 4 or 5 classification, with 5 being the highest, the most severe drought possible. I want to acknowledge that some communities in British Columbia are facing very serious impacts from drought. Last Friday, for example, the Sunshine Coast Regional District moved up to the highest level of water restrictions. I recognize how difficult this is for many people on the Sunshine Coast who went through very similar drought conditions last fall. The province is here to support local governments and First Nations. If a community would like to discuss drought planning or requires assistance, please reach out to your local emergency management and climate readiness regional office. The province can additionally reimburse local governments and First Nations for transportation costs of alternate drinking water if required. We are supporting local governments and First Nations in developing their own water scarcity response plans to supplement their own local emergency management plans. Additionally, we are developing what's called a water scarcity dashboard that will be available for local governments and First Nations to assist with their forecasting, modeling, and real-time decision-making for water supply. Protecting water is vital for people, including farmers, and communities, as well as fish and wildlife, the aquatic life that depend on river flow. This is also the time of year when thousands of people in BC flock to our rivers and creeks to celebrate the beautiful and dramatic annual salmon run. Wild salmon are at the foundation of First Nations cultures and ways of life and have significant economic, social, and ecological importance for all British Columbians. However, given the unprecedented scale and severity of drought conditions in British Columbia this year, we know that there could be adverse impacts in some watersheds. We are working with First Nations and Fisheries and Oceans Canada to continue to address the ongoing challenges facing wild salmon, including the drought impacts on fish habitat. By working together, we hope to minimize these long-term impacts as much as possible. We urge people, businesses, and industry to reduce water use and look for efficiencies wherever possible. Thank you to everyone who is conserving water. It is making a positive impact. So let me turn it back over to Mr. Ma.
Thank you so much, Minister Ralston. I'll turn it over to Neil McLaughlin, Superintendent of Predictive Services with the BC Wildfire Service, for a presentation on fall wildfire behavior.
Thank you, Minister Ma. I'll just bring up my screen share. Just give me one moment, please. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to our fall seasonal outlook for wildfire. My name is Neil McLaughlin. I work for the Provincial Wildfire Coordination Center out of Kamloops. It's the, located within the traditional territory of the Kamloops to Secwepemc peoples. And I'm honored to live, work, and play in this great lands. As we transition into fall and our children are going back to school, our firefighters are actually transitioning out of operational activities and maybe returning to school as well. Just a reminder that we still are very much in fire season, but there are changes, and we'd like to capture what those changes look like as we head into the fall months here. To start, though, we're going to do a quick recap of where we came from through the month of August. There were certainly some records set throughout the fire season, and August was one of those very pronounced months from a fire behavior perspective. And so using some information from our partners at Environment Climate Change Canada, what I'm showing on the screen here today is two graphics. On the left, it's a temperature anomaly from the month of August, and on the right, it's a precipitation anomaly from the same month of August. On the left, we're seeing throughout most of the province, temperatures were 1 to 3 degrees above normal for that month. And similarly, on the right, we're seeing that precipitation was below normal. In some places in the north, as much as 75% below what we would typically see for the month of August. And so these conditions that we've been seeing all fire season long have persisted through August. They've intensified drought impacts on our fire season. But more importantly, we've seen kind of this repeating pattern of high pressure ridges that bring those hot conditions breaking down and being followed by upper troughs that do a couple things. They start new fires. So we've seen additional lightning fires throughout the province through the month of August, but also worsening fire behavior. And so one of the dates that I really wanted to emphasize looking back on August is the 17th and 18th as a fairly significant dry cold front swept across the province, and it resulted in extreme fire behavior. Most notably, we would have seen in the media the McDougall and the Bush Creek wildfires impacting communities. But actually throughout the province, most of our active wildfires were impacted by that event and made significant runs. And even in certain locations, we see fire whirls, which are like a tornado, but involving flame and burning material. So a very significant event for the month of August. On this slide here, I'd like to just kind of, again, look at where we've come from and how we're heading into fall. And so I'm showing kind of two rows on this slide. On the top, we've got our duff moisture code, and that's an indication of the shallow duff layer on the forest floor and also kind of medium-sized fuels and their availability to burn. And so as you see colors of yellow, orange, and red, that's just indicating more availability to burn in those shallow duff layers and medium-sized fuels. Similarly, along the bottom row, I'm showing the drought code, and this is a slower moving indice, but talking to the deeper duff layers and the larger size fuels and their availability to burn. And the same thing applies to the color scheme there. As you're seeing those colors of yellow, orange into deep red, just an indication that there's much more availability of those size class fuels to burn. I want to highlight a couple things on this slide. And so as we move from left to right, we've got the 1st of August on the far left. Down the center, we've got September 1st, and then looking out to the 15th of September on the far right. And so one of the things that was, a fairly significant shift through the month of August and as we head into fall is that we started August with a bit of recovery in precipitation across the north. And that quickly rebounded as we moved through the month of August. Now, as we're entering into September, if you move to the far right on the top row, you'll notice we're back into those colors of orange and even red throughout the north. And so, again, a worsening of fire danger throughout the north. Along the bottom, I think my key message for you there is that our drought values have just been persistently getting worse, and particularly in the north. As we head into the fall, higher drought values are not uncommon for southern BC. And so these shades of yellow, orange, and red that we're seeing across southern BC are not atypical. But what I'll show you in their next slide is those colors that we're seeing in the north are very atypical. And so let's have a look at our current anomaly for something we call our buildup index. It's actually a combination of those two moisture codes I just showed you, the duff moisture code and the drought code. This index is really an indicator of just the availability of fuel to burn. And so looking across the province, it's a very pronounced above normal anomaly throughout northern BC. This is atypical for this time of year. We wouldn't typically see those values in the northern parts of the province. And so something to certainly pay attention to. Now, that's not to suggest that just because the values in the south are comparable to historical years that they're not of concern, but just really highlighting that we've got some anomalous conditions in northern BC. I thought I'd like to shift now, that's a snapshot at where we've come from, but looking at some recent fire behavior and kind of how we're heading into fall. So on this screen, there's a couple different images. I'll draw your attention to the kind of the background image on the right-hand side. There's a lot of red dots on that map, and it's a kind of a satellite image. This is captured from NASA and their active fire monitoring system from September 3rd. What you're seeing is hotspot detections across the province. And this was associated with a very significant wind event that occurred on that date and pushed fires in excess of 40 kilometers in one day. The little inset graphic I've got on the kind of the lower right there is showing some of the fires after that event, and you'll see that they're very long and skinny, which is indicative of wind-driven conditions. On the left is a more recent picture from one of our fires in the Prince George Fire Center, the North Lucas Lake Fire. And again, this was just a couple days ago, and this is an indication of the type of fire behavior we're seeing in the north right now. As we look into the fall, let's shift into the outlook. Again, referencing some information from our partners at Environment Climate Change Canada. We've got two maps here. One on the left is temperature and the probability of above or below normal temperatures as we move into September, October, November. And then on the right, a similar graphic showing the probability of above or below normal precipitation for the same 3-month period. A couple key messages to take away from this slide. Similar to what we've seen through the whole fire season, we're again expecting above normal temperatures through the fall, throughout all of the province. On the right-hand side, there's maybe less confidence in precipitation forecasts, but there is an indication that we will see below normal precipitation amounts throughout southern BC. However, just because we're seeing white or maybe more normal conditions forecast for precipitation throughout the rest of the province doesn't mean it's enough to recover the ongoing drought conditions in our fuels. And so this is a typically dry time of year, and we do expect to see that those dry conditions will persist through the fall. So a key message here is that our forest fuels will remain available to burn. There's a second thing to keep in mind here that's really not captured in these graphics is as we move into fall, as everyone knows, we start to see color change. And so our live vegetation, whether that be grasses and herbaceous material or our deciduous shrubs and trees, are starting to change color and they're desiccating. And those live vegetation will become more available to burn and easier to ignite. And so a message that I want to revisit as I close the outlook here. A couple other things are happening though as we shift into fall. And so I thought I might share a couple things about lightning. 72% of the over 2,000 wildfire starts we've had in 2023 have been attributed to lightning. As we move into fall, convective weather patterns, thunderstorms start to diminish, and lightning-caused wildfires are expected to decline. And so what you can expect is most of the fires that we'll see through the months of the fall, if there are new fires, they're likely to be caused by humans. And so it's just a reminder as those both live and dead fuels are available to be very cautious with any kind of human activity that could start a new fire. I'll kind of point at the two graphics on this slide here to help you understand what I'm sharing. And so on the left, this is just tracking in the dark black line, the number of new fire detections we've had week to week throughout the fire season. And so we can see that we were quite busy through late June into July. And then we've been on a bit of a downward trend ever since then. We could have been busier compared to historical anomalies. And so the background colors on that slide going from blue to red indicate the range of variability we've seen over the past 20 years. And so certainly there have been previous years that were much busier in August. That's something that certainly helped us through the month of August into September is we have had a declining new fire load in essence. And so as we look ahead into the months of September, October, we are referencing an analog year being the year 2017, matching quite similarly the pattern of fire activity we've seen this year. And as you kind of follow that dotted black line on that chart through the weeks to come, you'll see that it does start to really diminish in terms of new fire activity. On the right-hand side, we're looking more at averages. The graphic on the right isn't depicting our current fire season, but it's a graphic that kind of helps us in terms of what we might expect in terms of lightning activity. And so kind of broken down month by month over the past 20 years, the ratio between human and lightning-caused fires. And what you'll see is that we're predominantly seeing lightning as our key cause of fires through June, July, August. It is possible to see a couple new starts, and we're seeing that right now due to lightning in the month of September. But as we move into October, November, it really does diminish there. And so using that historical data, that allows us to kind of have insight in terms of what we might expect in terms of new fire activity. One of the things to take away from this graphic on the right, though, is The darker gray that's through the bottom of that graph is indicating human-caused fires. And what you'll notice is it's fairly consistent throughout August and into the end of September, even October, in that we're seeing around 75 to 100 fires per month due to human activity. And so we don't expect those statistics to likely change, although we really do encourage the public to be careful with any kind of activity that could cause a fire. This is likely to be the cause of any new fire activity as we move into the fall. So again, that key message, just to be careful and mindful with any kind of activity that could cause a new fire start. The good news, though, is that we're not expecting an additional fire load due to lightning as we move into the fall. As we kind of transition into my last couple slides here, another couple closing thoughts about our outlook. I'm sharing here a couple statistics about our fire season. I'm showing in the table area burned by our 6 different fire centers, and then the total down at the bottom. So, you know, I'm sure you've heard a lot in the media at this point. This is a record-setting year for BC. We're over 2.3 million hectares burned. 78% of that total is due to fire activity in our Prince George Fire Centre alone. This was a significant fire season for BC, but more importantly, a significant fire season for the North. Looking on the left-hand side, I'm showing fire danger rating for today across the province. And you can see the, you know, kind of the outlined boundaries of our 6 fire centers there. And so again, just picking up on the fact that we're still maintaining those shades of orange and red, which is an indication of high to extreme fire danger going into the fall through Prince George. So there are a number of ongoing active fires throughout the Prince George region, and we do expect those fires will continue to burn through the fall. We will continue to put resources on them, but it's very likely that we'll see those fires burn through fall, and some of them may even burn through the winter and pop back up next spring. It's just incredibly dry up north and very difficult to bring all fires and all parts of fires under control without the help of rain and changes in the weather. So I'd like to kind of wrap up our outlook here with a couple key takeaways. Again, fuels remain critically dry, and temperatures that are above normal, precipitation amounts that are below normal are not helping with that. And so we can expect similar conditions we've had through the summer to persist through the fall fire season. From a good news perspective, new lightning-caused fires will decrease. Just a reminder that human activity can ignite new fires. Be mindful with any kind of activity that could be cause of a new start, especially in cured vegetation. Another thing that's working to our advantage is shorter day length. We all know that it's, you know, by the time we're getting home from work, it's getting dark out. This really helps reduce the number of hours fires can actively burn each day. And so really, as we look into the next message here around strong winds, that is what's going to drive fire behavior through the remainder of our fire season. We're going to see, and it's quite typical to have upper troughs and cold fronts moving through the province, bringing strong winds. And right now we've seen a kind of a repeating pattern of that every couple days. When those weather systems are not accompanied by any precipitation, they can quickly result in fast spreading fires, whether that be our current active fire load or any new starts. And so it's a reminder that although things might be slowing down and although we might be seeing reduced fire activity, when we have these weather patterns set up, things can quickly escalate. And so fires that haven't been doing anything for several days could quickly go to running 10, 20, even more kilometers in one single day. And so these will be short-lived wildfire events, but they can be high impact depending on where they occur. So just a reminder that we're not out of fire season yet and drawing particular attention to the far north. So fire danger remains high to extreme in the northeast. And again, northern wildfires are expected to continue to show activity through the fall and potentially into next spring. So with that, that's the end of my outlook. and we will remain on the line for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. So in addition to Neil, Minister Ralston, and myself, we also have on the line Cliff Chapman, Director of Wildfire Operations with the BC Wildfire Service, Connie Chapman, Acting Director of the Water Management Branch with the Ministry of Forests, Dave Campbell, Head of the River Forecast Center with the Ministry of Forests, and Ian Cunning, Senior Director of Regional Operations with the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. As a reminder for reporters in the phone, please press *1 to enter the queue. That's *1 to ask a question. For media in the room, please line up at the microphone provided and wait to be called. Please make sure to provide your full name and outlet. Media will be limited to one question and one follow-up. We will take questions from media in the room first. Our first question is from Brenna from Canadian Press. Go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, I'm not quite sure. I guess maybe with the River Forecast Center could take this one on. So we're seeing it's going to stay very dry with drought conditions into the fall. But, presumably once November, December, January hit, we will be seeing rain. And I was wondering what proactive measures are being taken to account for the severe wildfire season when it comes to possible flooding this fall, and potentially how the River Forecast Center is doing its modeling and projections. Will the severity of the wildfire activity be taken into account in those projections?
Sure, I can start and pass it over to the River Forecast Center to add on as well. I will say that Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, our teams work very closely with communities to assess after wildfire damage. And some of that assessment will be to identify hazards that remain following a fire. It may be, fallen trees, damage to important infrastructure, downed hydro lines, but we also seek to understand increased risks around debris flows and landslides due to the impact to the landscape as a result. So that work is underway with communities to help us understand kind of what happens or what increased risks exist on the landscape after these wildfires as well. And maybe Dave, you can speak to how the River Forecast Center kind of responds to this.
Brenna, do you have a follow-up?
Sorry, we're going to Dave Campbell.
Yeah, thanks. And when we look at, in terms of the forecasting side of things, Minister Ma has kind of highlighted some of the programs related to very specific post-wildfire hazards, particularly things like landslides that crop up. So there's a program to assess that within the Ministry of Forests to look at some of those elevated hazards. When we look at the flood risk perspective and how that's considered in terms of forecasting, we look at within the River Forecast Center, we'll look at watersheds to see where we have burns and fires from this year to help us understand where some of those increased risks may be. As we go into the fall, we start to transition very much into that storm monitoring phase of work. So we're looking at as rain systems come through, really highlighting those in terms of our forecasting to understand where the kind of near-term risks may be. We also have the more seasonal outlook side of things. So we're working with partners as we come into the fall season, particularly emergency management and climate readiness, to be engaging in seasonal readiness preparedness with local communities to highlight some of those seasonal hazards. So both including things that might relate to or come out of the fire season, but also more specifically to the seasonal hazards that we come into as we come into things like severe storms, the atmospheric rivers and things like that happen through the fall. So really more of the broader seasonal readiness and including some of those specific hazards that might be elevated due to the fires.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yes, actually, this question is for Minister Ralston. Minister, we have a story out today based on documents released through Freedom of Information request, and they show that officials with the province and the city of Merritt knew about significant problems with dikes since at least 2018, and that's several years before the atmospheric rivers in 2021. So I'm aware that municipalities are responsible for dike maintenance, and that the province provides oversight through your ministry. The province has the power to issue orders for any repair work that might need to be done, but the documents show there appear to have been no orders or even basic follow-up in response to 4 consecutive years of annual dike reports that highlighted problems in Merritt. So in light of the severe wildfire season and the connection between fire and flooding, what we've just been talking about, what can you tell me about the province's plans to step up its oversight of dikes, especially those that are protecting communities and critical infrastructure?
Thank you very much for that question. That is an insightful question. Certainly, beginning after the extensive flooding in November 2021, that really highlighted the importance of preparation for flood. British Columbia's mitigation and awareness efforts have been accelerated since then, and funds have been allocated. I have a figure of $145 million for over 380 flood risk reduction projects since 2017. We've also established a community emergency preparedness fund to build community resilience. Dealing specifically with Merritt, I did meet in a trip to Merritt, I can't remember exactly when, in the late spring, with the mayor, the council, and their senior staff. They have completed an analysis of what took place, and there is a federal fund which they are completing an application to, which the province supported. That application went in July. So looking forward, given the extensive analysis they've done, the preparations that they've taken for the next possible flood event, I'm optimistic that the situation that arose will not take place again. Thank you.
Our next question is from Sarah from City News. Go ahead, Sarah.
My question is for Minister Ma. So how concerning is it that water levels are low and that, the forecast is saying rain won't be enough to offset the drought? Is this really concerning? What's being done to really address that?
Yeah, so I can start and see if Minister Ralston would like to add, and anyone else on the line as well. We are facing a very serious drought situation here in British Columbia. It is unlike any kind of drought conditions that we have seen in the past. About a week ago, I characterized it as a sleeping giant of a natural disaster, and that is because it is a slow, lumbering kind of natural disaster that isn't immediately apparent to those of us in communities that can still turn on the tap and access water. But water is life. It is absolutely everything. It is fundamental to everything that we do. We here in British Columbia have been very fortunate to not have to think very much about water because it has always been plentiful and available to us. The type of drought that British Columbia and the government of British Columbia is typically familiar with is localized short-term drought. And that's what a lot of our drought planning is based on. And so you have a community that is facing water scarcity, and we step in to help them access and transport potable water from nearby communities. Or if you have a ranching community that is experiencing water scarcity, then they're able to access feed from a nearby community. But what we're facing in BC this year, and what is likely to happen more and more into the future as a result of climate change, is widespread, province-wide, prolonged drought. Now, it is too early to know how severe these drought conditions will be going into the future because our forecasting is simply not that accurate in terms of how much rain we're going to get in different areas, how it'll interact with the landscape across the province. And it is likely, and very possible rather, I'm going to say possible, it is possible that parts of the province will come out of the drought over the fall and the winter, and other parts of the province will stay in the drought over the fall and winter. So right now, the province, recognizing this kind of new world and new reality that we are faced with as a result of the climate crisis, has been standing up a cross-ministry, cross-government effort to really understand where our gaps in knowledge are, and how we can fill those gaps as quickly as possible, and how we can create a overall strategy to support not just at the provincial level, but also local governments in their response to water scarcity. Now, I will say also, again, it is too early to know exactly what this will look like into the future. But I think it is safe to say that with the climate crisis and the changing climate, we will have to be more prepared and aware of drought conditions in the future.
Sorry, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, this would be for Connie Chapman. So can you talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in water levels in watersheds, so water reservoirs across BC? And, are we chancing, dipping into emergency stores? What is that looking like?
Go ahead, Connie.
Thank you, Minister Ma, and thank you for the questions. We're definitely seeing, reservoirs at kind of the lower operating levels than we would like to see for this time of year. So recognizing within the bands that a reservoir operates, there's the low level and the high level, and normally we see a trend within the middle. And so we are seeing some of those reservoirs at that lower level for what's the historical normal for this time of year. With that being said, it really goes forward, and as Minister Ma indicated, and also Dave Campbell in the previous question, is to how we choose to prepare in regards to next season. So if we continue to trend on those low levels and we don't see the returns in the reservoir elevations, then planning is going to have to happen in respect to being able to sustain that long term. With that being said, some reservoirs operate on multi-year cycles. So smaller reservoirs, they would have a turnover rate within a year or so, whereas larger reservoirs, it can take a couple of years to turn over and also have that buffer and support just due to size and demand. So moving forward, we are going to have to keep an eye on the reservoirs and really look at planning and water use into next year if we don't see the reservoir elevations increase in the coming months with the hopeful returns of the fall rains.
We will take questions from media online now. Our first question is from Aaron McCarthy, Global News. Go ahead, Aaron.
Hi there. I understand the water levels in the Arrow Lake are quite low. People along the lake concerned about it specifically, and there's some complications around the Columbia River Treaty. But can the provincial government take steps to improve the water levels there?
Thanks very much. I'm going to take that question. The water levels in the Arrow Lakes are, as you said, a part of the overall scheme of regulation called the Columbia River Treaty. That's a treaty between Canada and the United States about water systems that flow from Canada into the United States. And that is currently being renegotiated. So the levels at which the Arrow Lakes are kept is subject to that treaty. I know that residents around the Arrow Lake have had a concern about the level, because obviously if the level is very low, it impacts the activities that you can undertake on the lake itself. But I'm afraid for any further detail, I'll have to send you to the Ministry of Energy, who are the direct regulator of the levels of the Arrow Lakes.
Aaron, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, a question for Mr. Ma. You keep talking about the emergency involving growth, but I'm hearing from regional districts there seems to be a disconnect at the provincial level. For example, officials have been asking for approval to implement measures to mitigate the situation.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up quite a bit, and I caught maybe 25% of that. Do you mind trying again?
Is this any better?
So far, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. You talk about the emergency on drought. I feel like I'm still breaking up. Can you hear me?
I heard you talk about the emergency on drought, and then there wasn't anything after that.
Yeah. The government is slow to implement changes on the ground. The regional districts are quite quite upset about certain slowdowns at the provincial level. Is government acting fast enough to reflect your declaration of this emergency?
So I think I caught your question. Can you say it just one more time to make sure I have it?
I'm sorry, I don't understand why I can't be heard here.
No, that's right. You're just cutting in and out a little bit. Can you just repeat the question part for me?
Minister, is there a disconnect between your statement on the concern of the emergency and the provincial government's implementation of changes that are needed?
Okay. Thank you so much for that question. You know what? I think that we've been communicating from very early on in this year the severity of the drought situation that we are forecasting. And that is part of the reason why we have been appealing to the public to conserve water where they can and working with local communities on increasing their water restrictions as well. Most local authorities, they do have the ability to increase water restrictions. And we were able to see many communities do so following our calls and communication of the severity of drought. There are also water licensees across the province that are directly regulated by the province. And I'm happy to see if Minister Ralston has anything to add, but since about April, water licensees have been receiving requests for voluntary water consumption reductions once, twice, 3 times, multiple times. I think about 30,000 water licensees have actually received these requests. And those requests for voluntary reductions have actually yielded some very positive results. In many areas, the voluntary reductions have made it such that government has not had to step in with temporary water protection orders. However, there have been areas where those voluntary reductions were not enough, and the province did have to step in with temporary protection orders. I will say temporary protection orders are something that we issue as a last resort because they are very impactful. And we can see how they impact we're hearing stories already from many ranchers and farmers about the impact that they are facing. It is not something that we relish issuing. It is something that we do when it is necessary.
Our next question is from Xiao Zhu, Global and Mail. Go ahead, please.
Thanks. Actually, I wanted to follow up on the question on dikes. Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives, the organization that requested the FOI document on dikes, they called on the province to resume authority over diking. Municipalities have been asking that for years as well. Are you going to do that?
Thanks very much for the question. The report does make some references to some FOI documents, which I'm in the process of having the report being issued earlier today. I'm soliciting responses to that. I would say generally that in 2003, under the previous Campbell government, much of the responsibility for the maintenance and operation of dikes was sent to the municipalities and regional districts. The province retained a very limited supervisory role, but the larger responsibility was rested there. But it's clear that that system, and that became very clear in the atmospheric river in 2021, doesn't work. And so that's part of the reason why we're developing a much more expansive flood control strategy for the province. The diking network is extensive in many regions of the province, whether it's in the Lower Mainland or the Okanagan, and repairs and development of a more resilient diking system has a big price tag. So certainly that's something that we're working with the federal government in terms of disaster relief. And I gave you earlier the example of Merit and one of the federal programs that will assist in recovery and preparation moving forward. But so certainly I take the report seriously, and I think it is part of a call for action that we've heard some time ago and are working on to develop a more expansive and effective flood control system for the province.
Xiao, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. Thanks. Also, more than a year after the revelation that there are more than 100 orphan sites in BC, has the provincial government looked to take over responsibility for those structures, or are you leaving it to municipalities?
Well, we're working collaboratively with the local governments and regional districts and the specific subspecies of jurisdiction, the diking districts, to develop a broad range of flood reduction options. And that's part of developing a flood strategy. Certainly the atmospheric river in November 2021 was a real call for rethinking the flood control system in British Columbia, although and that work is definitely underway. There are internal processes that we're advised on and we're working on, and they will come forward soon, I expect. And so we hope to be in a better position should we face a similar challenge as we faced in November 2021. So thank you.
Our next question is from Wolf Deppner from Black Press. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you for taking my so we're coming up to the this tomorrow. What will happen to the state of emergency tomorrow?
So sorry, the audio issue must be on our end because you were also cutting out, but I believe you were asking about the provincial state of emergency. So the current provincial state of emergency, which was extended 2 weeks ago, will expire at midnight between Thursday and Friday if it is not extended. The extension is something that we're regularly assessing, and over the next 24 hours, we'll be watching that closely as well. If it is not extended, it will expire. That being said, there are some areas of the province over which I have responsibility for issuing evacuation orders, particularly in the Stikine region, because it is the only unincorporated area of the province. So we would have to, if the provincial state of emergency expires, an additional local state of emergency would have to be issued by me in the Stikine region in order to maintain the evacuation order there. We are, sorry, if it sounds like I'm out of breath, it's because I have a tiny creature that keeps kicking me in the lungs. Give me one. So keeping in mind that we are on the tail end of the wildfire season, we are seeing evacuation orders drop. The alerts are still quite high, but we are seeing some improved conditions in the province. And also keeping in mind that the provincial state of emergency is required for non-wildfire, or emergency orders not directly related to the fighting of wildfires. So we are assessing whether it is required, and yeah, we'll have more to say about that probably tomorrow, because conditions do change and evolve very rapidly, as we saw on the day that the provincial state of emergency was originally declared. And so I don't want to presuppose the next 24 hours. So hopefully that helps.
Wolf, do you have a follow-up?
Not your file, but at the start of your presentation, you talked about the needs to local tourism across British Columbia. At this stage, what resources, additional resources, also for tourism operators might be in the fall?
Wolf, could you please repeat your question a bit slowly, please?
Of course, my apologies. What, if any, additional resources could be forthcoming for tourism operators in British Columbia?
Okay. I think I caught that question, being around supports for tourism operators. Yeah, I do want to recognize how incredibly impacted small businesses and businesses that rely on tourism have been through the wildfire season. There have been a number of impacts, whether it has been impacts due to highway closures or direct impacts as a result of fires in communities. We also recognize that tourism in BC has suffered a bit of a reputational impact as a result of all of the international attention that we've been getting as a result of the record wildfire season that we've experienced. So the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture is working with communities to identify supports for those kinds of activities. I understand that Destination BC actually just launched a tourism campaign a couple of days ago, encouraging people to visit places like the Okanagan, like the Shuswap, like Tofino and Ucluelet and other areas that are so tourism dependent and have been hard hit by the wildfire season as well. I suspect that they will continue that work, and we can maybe have somebody from Tourism, Arts and Culture follow up with you if you'd like for further information on that.
Our next question is from Marcella Bernardo, CBC Kamloops. Go ahead, please.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, so far so good.
My question is for Minister Ralston, and it involves what's being done to address the conflict with farmers in the North Okanagan who are defying ministry orders to stop irrigating their crops. Natural resource officers have repeatedly clashed with people in Westwold during enforcement checks, and concerns have now been raised about somebody getting hurt.
Thanks very much. As we've said, and it is the policy of the department, the department first looks to voluntary compliance with reductions, and that has been the practice and indeed the response of most water users. The steps as the drought has increased in severity, all water users are notified of that suggestion that they make their use voluntary rather than resorting to measures that require enforcement. Under the Act, there is a balance required. On the Salmon River, the advice that was given was that salmon run would be wiped out if, given the water levels are so low. It's not a question of skipping a season and then coming back. It's really a profound environmental question where the salmon run would be wiped out. The Act requires the consideration of agricultural interest absolutely as a factor before making an order. And those orders have been issued. And I encourage everyone who receives one of those orders to comply with the order.
Do you have a follow-up?
I do, Minister. These farmers are telling me that they've repeatedly tried to meet with people from your office to try to explain that they have their own aquifers and that they aren't impacting the river at all with the water that they're using to irrigate their crops. So where's the disconnect here? What can be done to try to either explain to them that they are, or what's being done to try to listen to them and hear them out?
Well, I understand that ministry officials have met with affected farmers, and what the scientific advice is that significant work has been done to gauge the connection between the wells and the affected rivers. And the studies and the data collected by the province indicate clearly that the wells in the Salmon River area are connected to the river. And this is not new or recently announced science. The data also demonstrated the need for a temporary protection order for salmon in 2021 on the very same river. So continued mapping of the system will occur to ensure that the data remains up to date.
That's all the questions we have today. That concludes the availability. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.